God versus Nature: The Conflict Between Religion and Science in History. Chapter 14. Science, Technology, and Our Environment. Quote, "Man is a singular creature. He has a set of gifts which make him unique among all the animals, so that, unlike them, he is not a figure in the landscape, he is a shaper of the landscape. In body and in mind, he is the explorer of nature, the ubiquitous animal, who did not find but has made his home in every continent." Unquote. So begins Jacob Bronowski's book, The Ascent of Man. Compared to the other animals, Bronowski notes, man possesses an extremely crude survival kit. He is not particularly strong or fast or of keen sight, smell, or hearing. But he possesses one extraordinary tool, a mind that uses reason, which allows him to project far into the future or the past, to make plans for action, and to shape his environment in accordance with his needs. He can act on a grand scale in a way that makes him different in kind from all other animals. Humans have never really lived in harmony with their environment. They have always shaped it to some extent. Early humans in hunter-gatherer societies probably hunted large animals to extinction. The first dramatic landmark of human history and the key to the development of civilization is known as the Agricultural Revolution or the Neolithic Revolution. This occurred roughly 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, when humans began cultivating plants and domesticating animals. This led to the widespread clearing of land and the reshaping of ecosystems. The development of technology progressed in fits and starts, often in ways not directly connected to scientific activity. The small machines and mechanisms developed by ancient Greeks, such as Archimedes, were seen as toys and curiosities, not actually useful for real work. The Roman architectural advances, such as the arch and concrete, did not merge out of scientific studies. Over the course of the Middle Ages, a handful of simple technologies gradually came into widespread use. These included the water wheel mill and the iron plow. The Industrial Revolution. In the history of technology, the most important single landmark is the Industrial Revolution, which began in 18th century England. The dominant cause was the culture of the Enlightenment. This was a culture of reason, science, worldliness, and relative political and economic freedom, capitalism. People were free to think, experiment, invent, and to invest in new types of ventures. As a result, they created a revolution in productivity. James Watt's steam engine, which he developed in the 1770s, was perhaps the most important invention of the Industrial Revolution. It created a practical way to use heat, from burning wood or coal, to generate regular rotation of an axle. This could then drive a wide variety of different machinery, leading to steam-driven factories, steamboats, and railroads. The factory system allowed the inexpensive creation of an abundance of consumer products. Consider the garment industry. Between 1784 and 1860, the price of cotton cloth decreased by 99%, allowing hundreds of millions of people to dress comfortably and cleanly. The Industrial Revolution spread out from England to America, Europe, and then the rest of the world, leading to a radical transformation of human life. The internal combustion engine led to practical automobiles. Together with trains, these made it possible for the non-wealthy to easily travel long distances for the first time in history. The development of electricity enabled the safe and practical lighting of homes, as well as countless labor-saving devices. As a result of all this technology, in an atmosphere of freedom and capitalism, there was more and more development of improved products and more efficient methods of production. We have had more and better food, clothing, shelter, medical care, countless conveniences of life, and a significant reduction in human fatigue and exhaustion while extending our lifespans. These have led to the end of famines and plagues. They have eliminated the terrible diseases of cholera, diphtheria, smallpox, tuberculosis, and typhoid fever. Industrial Revolution has actually ended famine. It has done this by creating an extraordinary abundance and variety of food and created the storage and distribution systems to bring it to everyone. As always in history, new technologies often led to unforeseen problems, but in general, the benefits far outweighed the problems. The early factories were not pleasant places to work by modern standards, but their workers, which included children, came from back-breaking work in the fields, 14-hour days, and the risks that their crops would be lost to drought or flood. The economic system of the present-day industrial world is a truly remarkable achievement. The industrialization that it spawned is still growing and transforming the world. This transformation has been overwhelmingly positive for human well-being. We should not take for granted the freedom, science, and technology that led to this. This progress in human well-being has been thoroughly documented by Steven Pinker in his 2018 book, Enlightenment Now: The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. Consider life expectancy and child mortality. Starting in the 19th century, global life expectancy began to rise. It picked up speed in the 20th century and is continuing with no slowdown. Through most of human history, child mortality was at appalling levels. 1/5 of children died in their first year, and almost half died before reaching adulthood. Then, starting in the 19th century, rates of childhood mortality started a rapid decline, which continues to this day. Pinker documents similar trends in many other measures of well-being, including deaths from infectious disease and accidents, amounts of famine, malnutrition, and pollution. He also documents dramatic and continuing positive worldwide trends in wealth, education, and safety. Dramatic progress is even apparent in the statistics of climate-related deaths, i.e., fatalities due to heat waves, cold spells, droughts, floods, and storms. From the 1920s to 2010, the total mortality rate from these events globally declined by 98%. This is not so surprising if we consider that global poverty levels have fallen dramatically, and that a nation's wealth makes a considerable difference in its ability to build effective infrastructure that protects people from dangerous climatic events. An important part of our environment is the quality of our drinking water, and this quality depends on economic development. Water quality depends on chemical purification plants, pipelines, and pumping stations. Air quality in cities has always been poorer than in the open country, but today it is much better than in the past. Before modern industry, public streets in cities were open sewers, and horse manure was everywhere. Environmentalism and the Quasi-Religion of Greenism. Of all the polarizing issues in the world today, there is perhaps none more so than environmentalism, especially in the United States. Political conservatives denounce what they call the global warming hoax, and liberals accuse climate change deniers of crimes against humanity. Many politicians and activists talk about the existential threat posed by climate change and push for government action to quickly phase out fossil fuels, which currently provide about 85% of the world's energy. However, much of the public is not on board with this. Recent Gallup polls show that only 3 to 4% of Americans specify environment as a top concern. The modern environmental movement took shape in the 1960s. It emerged out of a combination of two factors. One, a set of recent scientific discoveries about climate and ecology. Two, a romantic philosophic movement having a reverence for untouched nature. Natural phenomena revealed by the science included the following: the approximate trajectories of climate changes that the Earth has undergone in the past, the carbon cycle, in which carbon flows between the atmosphere, ocean, and land, the types of climate feedbacks that can affect global warming and cooling trends. The Romantic philosophic movement had its roots in 18th and 19th century thinkers such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Friedrich Hegel, a descendant of Kant, who reacted strongly against the Enlightenment's commitment to reason as the means of knowing reality and guiding action. Steven Pinker points out that, quote, the mainstream environmental movement latched onto a quasi-religious ideology, unquote, which he calls greenism. This ideology, quote, can be found in the manifestos of activists as diverse as Al Gore, the Unabomber, and Pope Francis, unquote. Greenism has a pathological fear of industrial civilization, science, and technology. As such, it is the most reactionary movement in the history of the world. According to this ideology, quote, unless we repent our sins by degrowth, deindustrialization, and a rejection of the false gods of science, technology, and progress, humanity will face a ghastly reckoning in an environmental judgment day, unquote. Pinker continues, quote, as with many apocalyptic movements, greenism is laced with misanthropy, including an indifference to starvation, an indulgence in ghoulish fantasies of a depopulated planet, and Nazi-like comparisons of human beings to vermin, pathogens, and cancer, unquote. What is religious about this ideology? Author Michael Crichton gives us some clues, arguing that it is, quote, a perfect 21st century remapping of traditional Judeo-Christian beliefs and myths. There's an initial Eden, paradise, a state of grace and unity with nature. There's a fall from grace into a state of pollution as a result of eating from the tree of knowledge. And as a result of our actions, there is a judgment day coming for us all. We are all energy sinners, doomed to die unless we seek salvation, which is now called sustainability. Sustainability is salvation in the Church of the Environment. Just as organic food is its communion, that pesticide-free wafer that the right people with the right beliefs imbibe. Unquote. Similar comparisons of the green ideology to religion have been made by numerous accomplished scientists, including physicist Freeman Dyson and ecologist James Lovelock, author of the famous Gaia hypothesis. The similarities between greenism and religion include the following. 1. A standard of value outside of human life. 2. Recurring predictions of doom. 3. Authoritarianism. And 4. A focus on rituals. A standard of value outside of human life. Religion has always placed the ultimate source of moral value to be outside of the lives of actual human beings. This source has typically been God and a supernatural realm. Greenism agrees with conventional religion that the source of moral value must be outside of mankind, but it holds that this source is pristine nature, nature untainted by human influence. Many people consider wilderness to be intrinsically good, apart from its value to us. By this standard, humans are the enemy, as made explicit by many environmentalists. John Muir, a founder of the mainstream Sierra Club, wrote that, quote, I have precious little sympathy for the selfish propriety of civilized man, and if a war of races should occur between the wild beasts and Lord Man, I would be tempted to sympathize with the bears, unquote. David Foreman, founder of Earth First, stated that, quote, wilderness has a right to exist for its own sake, and for the sake of the diversity of the life forms it shelters. We shouldn't have to justify the existence of a wilderness area by saying, well, it protects the watershed and it's a nice place to backpack and hunt and it's pretty. Unquote. Biologist David Graeber says he is one of those who, quote, value wilderness for its own sake, not for what value it confers upon mankind. We are not interested in the utility of a particular species or free-flowing river or ecosystem to mankind. They have intrinsic value, more value to me than another human body, or 1 billion of them. Human happiness and certainly human fecundity are not as important as a wild and healthy planet. It is cosmically unlikely that the developed world will choose to end its orgy of fossil energy consumption, and the third world its suicidal consumption of landscape. Until such time as Homo sapiens should decide to rejoin nature, some of us can only hope for the right virus to come along. Unquote. In December 2018, the New York Times published an op-ed piece by philosophy professor Todd May titled, "Would Human Extinction Be a Tragedy?" Here he argues that, in some sense, the extinction of humanity would be a tragedy, but, considering the damage that we do to the earth, it also, quote, might just be a good thing, unquote. Predictions of imminent doom. Growing up in Chappaqua, New York, in the 1970s, I remember being told by my teachers that scientists were predicting catastrophic global cooling caused by industrial activity. Within a few years, the scientific and media concern shifted to global warming, along with related population and resource catastrophes. We have now had 5 decades of such predictions, of which here is a small sample. From bestseller The Population Bomb, 1975, by ecology professor Paul Ehrlich, quote, "The battle to feed all of humanity is over. In the 1970s and 1980s, hundreds of millions of people will starve to death. At this late date, nothing can prevent a substantial increase in the world death rate," unquote. Ehrlich also wrote in 1970, quote, "If I were a gambler, I would take even money that England will not exist in the year 2000, unquote. In 1970, Senator Gaylord Nelson, Democrat from Wisconsin, often considered the Father of Earth Day, cited the Secretary of the Smithsonian, Dr. S. Dillon Ripley, who, quote, believes that in 25 years, somewhere between 75 and 80% of all the species of living animals will be extinct, unquote. In 1972, a prestigious study called The Limits to Growth by the Club of Rome predicted the exhaustion of almost every industrial resource, including aluminum by 2003, copper by 1993, natural gas by 1994, and petroleum by 1992. In 1982, Mostafa Tolba, executive director of the UN Environment Program, warned, quote, "By the turn of the century, an environmental catastrophe will witness devastation as complete, as irreversible as any nuclear holocaust," unquote. In 1989, environmentalist Bill McKibben wrote that, quote, "The choice of doing nothing, of continuing to burn ever more oil and coal, is not a choice. In other words, it will lead us, if not straight to hell, straight to a place with a similar temperature," unquote. Also, quote, "A few more decades of ungoverned fossil fuel use and we burn up, to put it bluntly," unquote. John Holdren, science advisor to Barack Obama, claimed, according to Paul Ehrlich in 1986, quote, "As University of California physicist John Holdren has said, it is possible that carbon dioxide climate-induced famines could kill as many as 1 billion people before the year 2020, unquote. Of course, none of these catastrophes came to pass. They were all not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. As energy expert Alex Epstein notes, quote, "Instead of following the leading advice and restricting the use of fossil fuels, people around the world nearly doubled their use of fossil fuels, which allegedly should have led to an epic disaster. Instead, due to the resulting availability of cheap, reliable energy, it led to an epic improvement in human life across the board." Unquote. Hollywood has found much inspiration from these doomsday scenarios, turning out innumerable science fiction movies with the same theme: the disaster that man brings on himself when he tampers with Mother Nature. The modern media and politicians also crave disaster stories, which can be effective in getting the public's attention. What is most notable is that, while new predictions of apocalypse keep coming out, nobody circles back and asks why the earlier predictions were so very wrong. Instead, our thought leaders count on the previous predictions being forgotten, or they excuse them on the ground that wild exaggeration is necessary to motivate political action. But the terribly wrong predictions are symptoms of an anti-progress ideology. Authoritarianism. Within the religion of Catholicism, there are anointed authorities, priests, whom we are expected to follow. In the modern world, we are supposed to accept the conclusions of a manufactured consensus of scientists, instead of demanding clear explanations of what scientists know and don't know, and how certain they can be of their claims. Alex Epstein has identified two different approaches one can have to experts. One can treat them as authorities to be followed and not to be questioned. Or one can treat them as guides who can help us to understand the issues in a given field, guides from whom we should expect clear explanations, and who should be open to a wide range of challenging questions. In medicine, we go to experts, doctors, and we generally trust their opinions because of the good reputation of modern medicine, which has, by its record, clearly earned its reputation. But even then, you should not trust your doctor blindly. When the stakes are high, you should get second and third opinions, and then make sure you fully understand your options. Has climate science earned our trust regarding the prediction of future climate changes? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's global climate models have consistently predicted greater warming than we have observed. Climate scientists such as Patrick Michaels have argued that the models have exhibited systemic prediction failures, showing that their sensitivity to CO2 level was too high. The term climate denier, or denialist, is now regularly used to refer to any climate thinker who sees likely climate changes as less than apocalyptic. However, most of these thinkers fully accept that climate is changing, and that human activity is contributing to it. Some of them refer to themselves as lukewarmers. The term denier is a smear term used to shut down debate. An example of the logical fallacy called argument from intimidation, it does not belong in any rational discussion. In addition to denier, there are other widely used terms that do not have clear definitions and which seem to be purposefully vague. These include sustainability, which organizations across the world are signing up for, although no one can explain exactly what it means. Climate change itself is a deliberately vague term. Does it refer to all climate changes, natural and man-made, major and minor? This is never made clear. Rituals without understanding. The New York Times writer John Tierney argues that the recycling of most types of materials is ultimately wasteful, given the enormous amount of energy and resources used in the recycling process. But the act of recycling, quote, makes people feel virtuous, especially affluent people who feel guilty about their enormous environmental footprint. It is less an ethical activity than a religious ritual, like the ones performed by Catholics to obtain indulgences for their sins. Unquote. The supposedly unconditional virtue of recycling has been, quote, indoctrinated in students from kindergarten through college, unquote. And as a result, Tierney argues, otherwise well-informed and educated people have no idea of the relative costs and benefits, unquote. The transportation and processing of consumer recyclables itself consumes a great deal of energy, and much of the resulting material is sent to landfills anyway. Because of the poor economics of recycling, hundreds of municipalities have stopped their recycling programs entirely, and this is not necessarily a bad thing. An economist has calculated that the total landfill size needed to contain all of the country's garbage for the next 1,000 years amounts to less than 0.1% of the land available for grazing in the continental U.S. Even that land would not be lost, since our landfills have linings and other environmental safeguards, and once filled, they are typically covered with grass and converted to parkland. Two other ritual-like behaviors that are encouraged today are 1. Turning out lights for Earth Hour, which has virtually no effect on climate, and 2. Switching to reusable grocery bags, which raises hygiene concerns. Given the above Christianity-like elements within environmentalism, it should not be surprising that numerous Christians have made common cause with the movement. In 1979, Pope John Paul II sanctified Francis of Assisi as the patron saint of ecology for the Catholic Church. Christian theologians have started talking about stewardship, while Al Gore talks about creation care and quotes from the Bible. Congregations are building green churches and celebrating Earth Day. The essential element in common between these two movements is the ethical ideal of altruism, which tells us to sacrifice for others. Greenism has simply expanded the definition of others to include the rest of the natural world. Carbon Calvinism. Publisher and author Peter Schwartz labels environmentalism as the philosophy of privation because it tells us that we must give up our comforts and our expectation of material progress. If untouched earth is the standard of value, then, as human beings, virtually everything we do is bad. This ideology tells us to turn away from modern science and technology because they use up natural resources and distance us from nature. If we take this idea seriously, this leads to a shorter and vastly impoverished life, a life of hard work and an early death for most of us. Environmentalism has always been more than just a social movement. It has always been a political movement as well. But a government that takes on the role of protecting the planet from humans is one that can control everything we do. It can control how much electricity we use, how much trash we dispose of, and how much we travel. It can control how much health care we use and how many children we have. In short, it can stop us from living. Writer Marian Tupy asks, quote, "Is it really so difficult to imagine a future in which each of us is issued with a carbon credit at the start of each year, limiting what kind of food we eat? Locally grown potatoes will be fine, but Alaskan salmon will be verboten. And how far we can travel. Visiting our in-laws in Ohio once a year will be permitted, but not Paris?" In fact, it is almost impossible to imagine a single aspect of human existence that would be free from government interference, all in the name of saving the environment. Unquote. Countless pseudoscientific studies are done to see the effects of different actions on our carbon footprints. An article in New Scientist suggests that the main problem with obesity is its carbon footprint. Similar articles talk about the carbon cost of divorce and other social trends. The Swedish Ministry of Sustainable Development states that, quote, "Women cause considerably fewer carbon dioxide emissions than men, and thus considerably less climate change." Unquote. This totalitarian aspect of the environmental movement has always appealed to former communists who were disenchanted by the clear failures of communism and were looking for another ideology with which to oppose capitalism. Science versus Quasi-Religion. As opposed to religions that rely on sacred texts, the sciences of ecology and climatology are primarily focused on reasoning from facts, as a perusal of their university textbooks should make clear. Measurements are clearly showing an increasing global average temperature, and it is possible that most of the recent warming is due to increased emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. Moreover, there is a potential for positive feedbacks to amplify a small warming into a much larger one, causing a significant sea level rise and numerous other serious problems. As we have seen in this chapter, there is also a decades-old anti-humanist movement that is eerily similar to a religion, even though it does not worship a supernatural God, which is closely connected to these sciences. Many of the scientists have bought into this ideology. The question then arises, to what extent should we hold these sciences in esteem and respect their conclusions, and to what extent might they be corrupted by a religious and anti-humanist agenda? It would certainly not be the first time that an entire scientific field was corrupted by ideology, as the history of Lysenkoism in the USSR makes clear. Given the immense statistical problems and complexities of measuring climate phenomena, including the many types of poorly understood positive and negative feedbacks, there are countless judgment calls that scientists have to make, such as setting criteria for rejection of temperature station readings due to the heat island effect. It is clearly possible for biases to influence reported scientific outcomes. For an outsider to the environmental sciences, it is virtually impossible to know the extent of any corruption. However, there are at least 3 reasons for suspecting that this field generates biased conclusions that should not simply be taken at face value. 1. The term climate change denier is widely used to shut down discussion. 2. The ClimateGate scandal revealed serious corruption on the part of certain climate scientists. 3. The IPCC Global Climate Model's predictions have a poor track record. What should we do about this? We need to recognize first that the keys to human flourishing are reason, science, technology, and a political freedom that allows people to think and act on their ideas in pursuit of their own well-being. We also need to recognize that economic development and industry themselves, with the reliable energy sources on which they depend, provide us an enormous amount of protection from the vagaries of the natural climate, as well as any other conceivable existential threats to mankind, such as immense meteors and antibiotic-resistant superbugs. We must also demand full accountability from climate scientists who predict doom and prescribe drastic political action. Drastic action requires dramatic justification. We need climate modelers to clearly and openly explain what their models predict, how reliable they have been, and how accurate we can expect them to be for predicting the future. We need climate scientists to openly address the concerns of their critics without dismissing them with ad hominem arguments. If it is clearly established that increasing carbon dioxide levels will cause terrible problems in the future, such as a 9-foot sea level rise by 2100, then governments and private organizations may need to build carbon capture facilities, or to transition from fossil fuels to low-carbon, reliable, high-energy density sources, such as nuclear and hydroelectric. They may also need to build extra infrastructure and relocate the most impacted communities. The title of this book is God versus Nature, but given the meaning of nature accepted by the radical Greens, the appropriate phrase may be nature as God.